Hello and welcome to the Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen Center for Thought and Culture online. I'm David DeSerto, Interim Executive Director. The Sheen Center is an initiative of the Archdiocese of New York to engage, elevate, and evangelize culture through the performing arts and thoughtful discourse. If you haven't done so already, please like us on Facebook, subscribe to our Sheen Talks YouTube channel, and go ahead and click that bell icon for notifications of future videos. Now, last December, Pope Francis proclaimed that 2021 would be the year of St. Joseph. Today, we're delighted to have with us best-selling author Mike Aquilina to talk about his new book, St. Joseph and His World. Mike is the author and editor of more than 50 books, including popular works on church history, especially the study of the Church Fathers. He's Executive Vice President of the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, a research center based in Stephenville, Ohio, and host of The Way of the Fathers, a podcast produced by CatholicCulture.org. Joining him is our friend and frequent Sheen contributor, Kathryn Lopez. Mike and Kathryn, thank you for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
In your book, you quote a friend of yours who refers to St. Joseph as, quote, the black hole at the center of the gospel galaxy. You know him by his effects more than by seeing the man himself. I love that quote. And I look forward to you shedding some illumination on this central but often elusive saint.
Yes, well, I mean, St. Joseph doesn't speak a word on the record. We don't know anything that he said in his life. Also, we never see anyone speaking to him, at least any human being speaking to St. Joseph in the pages of the gospel. So he's kind of a shadowy figure. And indeed, tradition has called him the shadow of the Father, the shadow of God the Father, because he's this paternal presence in the life of the Holy Family on earth. It was a joy writing about him and discovering more about him by exploring the shadows, really, because that's all we have of his life. We have these few clues and cues that we find in the pages of Mark's gospel or Matthew's gospel and Luke's gospel, and then we take those and we try to situate them within the world where Joseph lived. And so I tried to explore the historians of the time to see exactly what that world was like and how Joseph quite likely responded to his world.
Well, I'm going to take a back seat, sit back and enjoy as you and Kathryn explore those shadows. So thank you for being here, and I leave it to the two of you.
This is the best possible company.
As I joked earlier, I just want you to read from the books behind you. That backdrop is like a warm embrace. Thank you for bringing us into your cave.
That's what it is, Kathryn.
Fun fact for the audience. First of all, this is just an excuse to talk to you, Mike. But the most important fact to know about Mike Aquilina is his daughter, Grace, was my intern a few summers ago at the National Review Institute. And she was wonderful. She is Grace in the world. But in all seriousness about St. Joseph, you managed to write a book about a man who said nothing on the record, as you point out. And you implore people to make him their companions. And obviously, Pope Francis is in agreement with you. Why is knowing about his world, as you frame the book, so important to us in 2021?
Well, it was a world in crisis in many ways: political crisis, religious crisis, cultural crisis, you name it. It was a critical time. And Joseph, it seems, was at the vortex of this. I mean, every scene we see in the New Testament where Joseph appears is a moment of particular drama. He's supposed to marry, right? And he's along the way in that process, and he finds out that she's pregnant and he's not the father. This is a moment of crisis. And that's really the first time we see him. We're told that he's a just man, but that's all we know about him. We see how he handles that crisis. The next time we see him, he's getting a warning that King Herod, the most powerful man in Joseph's world, has decided that Joseph and Mary's baby is the enemy, and Herod is seeking him to kill him. That's a crisis. Joseph has to flee more than 1,000 miles, probably on foot or on the back of a donkey, and knowing that the full might of the military is pursuing him. That's a crisis. And then we don't see him for years. And the next thing we see, he's searching for his son who's been lost for 3 days. For 3 days in the big city in Jerusalem. Child loss is the greatest imaginable crisis. So every time we see Joseph, he's living in this turmoil, this crisis, and yet we never see him lose his cool. We never see him even move to say anything. He deals with the situation, and he deals with the situation with all the best natural and supernatural tools he has at his disposal. And he really solves problems. He goes forward through these very difficult circumstances, and he gets things done. He gets them done according to God's will. And that's what we all want to do. And we're living in a moment of many crises right now. We're living in a time of great turmoil and drama. We want to navigate these situations as Joseph did. So I think we have a lot to learn from him.
So you point out in the book, in scripture, we're told that when Joseph found out about Mary's pregnancy, he resolved to send her away quickly. And that sounds really cold when you read it. And why do you go into all the different theories about that?
Well, because a lot of people take different interpretations, and actually even the saints of the church have disputed with one another about the meaning of the situation. What was St. Joseph feeling? Because we don't know what he was feeling. So there's the awe, hypothesis that Joseph was just so awestruck by this situation, knowing that he could not be the father, and yet also knowing that Mary was not capable of sinning. He was just awestruck that God was acting in this way. He knew this was a work of the Holy Spirit, and he felt the way St. Peter did when St. Peter said, "Depart from me, Lord. I'm just not worthy of this." And it's quite possible that's what St. Joseph was feeling. Now, some people think he was feeling jealousy, that he was enraged and that he was pushing himself away from the situation. I tend to disagree with that, but that's what some of the saints have proposed. And still others think he was just perplexed by the situation. And I do think that that's plausible. Anybody would be perplexed by a situation like that. So I tend to think it was a combination of the awe hypothesis and the perplexity hypothesis, that these were both components in Joseph's feelings at the time and in his thinking at the time.
And that's the reality of our lives frequently, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. I don't really understand, but wow,
Yes, and yet we see Joseph getting out of these situations in the right way. I mean, look, he resolved to divorce her quietly. Resolved. And yet, what happens? He gets a revelation from an angel, and then he's just as resolved in the next moment to do something quite different, to enter the marriage and to remain in the marriage, to remain with Mary and the baby as a family. So we see him close to the angels at that time. And I think that's something that's important for us to learn. Joseph grew up in a world that had an intense awareness of the angels' presence and intervention in ordinary events. This was something that was just part of the fabric of the universe. It's shot through the entire Old Testament. We find angels everywhere in the Old Testament, and they're active in the lives of the prophets and the patriarchs and the lawgiver. Angels are everywhere in the narrative of Israel's history. Joseph knew this. Joseph also grew up with a synagogue liturgy, a temple liturgy, and private and public devotion that was saturated with angelic presence. If you read, for example, the documents of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the documents of the Essenes that were produced during the lifetime of St. Joseph, you find that they're intensely aware of the angels, and invested in angelic devotion. They were expecting a world war to launch at any moment. And their way of preparing was to memorize the names of the angels, to go to the angels, habituate yourself to approaching the angels so that you could fight alongside the angels, fight for right in such circumstances. So Joseph probably grew up with a habitual devotion to the angels because that was part of Israelite religion. It's part of biblical religion in the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Why is he sometimes called the angelic man?
Well, for one thing, because Scripture tells us about 4 close encounters that he had with angels, and that's 4 more than most of us are aware of anyway. I believe we're always encountering angels. Right now, you and I are encountering angels. We're working with the cooperation of our guardian angels, but we're not aware of it. Now, Joseph has these four episodes in St. Matthew's Gospel where an angel appears to him in a dream and tells him what to do next. So Joseph was probably habitually going to the angels. He knew the help of his guardian angels. So that's one reason. But later theologians did coin that name, angelic man, and apply it especially to Joseph. And they did it because they said he excelled all the orders of heavenly spirits in all of their particular virtues. You know, we think of all these names of spirits who are mentioned in the course of the liturgy: the cherubim and the seraphim, the thrones and dominions, principalities and powers. We encounter them in the Scripture, in the liturgy. They're everywhere, these names of heavenly spirits. Well, St. Teresa of Avila's spiritual director went through all of the orders and talked about how St. Joseph excelled all of them in their special virtues. The cherubim, they flanked the throne of God in heaven. Well, Joseph and Mary flanked the throne of God incarnate on earth. The seraphim, they burned with an ardent love for God in heaven. And St. Joseph burned with an ardent love for his son, and he showed it in his deeds. And then you go on through all of them. The principalities and the powers, they ruled in the household of God in heaven. Joseph ruled in the household of God as God's vice regent on earth. So all of these different orders had certain virtues, but Joseph excelled them all. And this spiritual director of St. Teresa of Avila, his name was Geronimo Gracian, he said that Joseph was honored as a prince in heaven, even during Joseph's earthly life.
Gracian, if you read him, he just like delights in St. Joseph.
He really does. He talks about the excellencies of St. Joseph, and his book has been translated into beautiful English, and it's available now. It's a beautiful book for us to get to know.
How and why would we want to rejoice in St. Joseph? I mean, St. Francis has a very clear invitation to people to get to know him. And you did not know that you were timing this book in conjunction with the year of St. Joseph, but that came as a surprise in December when this book was already probably put to press.
Well, you know, St. Joseph was a family man. He was a husband. He was a father. He was a worker, and we honor him as a worker in the liturgy on his feast day. And these are all important things. He was, you know, for all of his special gifts and extraordinary experiences, he was an ordinary Joe. He was a regular guy. He wasn't a theologian. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't a rabbi. He wasn't a priest. None of that stuff. His legacy was that of a carpenter. And even after he was dead, he was still known as the carpenter in his village. So he must have been good at it. You know, we all work at a trade, all of us, and we want to be known for it. We want to be recognized for it. We want to be good at it. So he gives everybody a model. There's an ordinariness about him that's so beautiful, even though some of his experiences, as I said, were extraordinary. I grew up in a household that was pretty intensely devoted to St. Joseph. My mother grew up with the devotion. I don't know why. She probably got it from her mother, who was from Sicily. But my mother had an image of St. Joseph prominent in our house. And I always say that he photobombed us all the time because it was on the best wall for taking photos. And so we're always lined up, and there's St. Joseph peeking over someone's shoulder. That the image is still in the house where my sister lives today. It's in the same spot, and I love that image. But my mother had this devotion to St. Joseph, and it came through for her. In 1954, she went into premature labor, which at that time was very, very dangerous because she was far from her due date. I don't remember how far from the due date, but perilously far. And she gave birth to my brother, my older brother, the one right before me in the birth order, and she was supposed to, by custom, name him for my grandfather. So my brother should have been named Salvatore. But she named him Joseph because she went urgently to St. Joseph in that time and begged the help of St. Joseph. And she got what she wanted. She got what she asked for. And so she named the baby Joseph. That baby Joseph became my sponsor at confirmation. He's my older brother, Joe. And I took the name Joseph as my confirmation name. It's my middle name also. So St. Joseph had this omnipresence in our household because of my mother's gratitude to him. And I grew up with it. And so this book is largely a tribute to my mother and her devotion. It's just an extension of her devotion.
I'm always sensitive to people who might happen upon conversations like this, who might be thinking, how on earth is St. Joseph helping people today? Can you explain the reality in faith of the intercession of the saints?
Yes. Yeah. We all live in a patronage culture. We all use whatever connections we have. I call the plumber I know best, and because he's going to give me the best deal. He's going to talk straight to me and that kind of thing. So it's a patronage culture. We go with the people we know, and these people in our experience are alive. we don't generally call dead people. Well, as Christians, we believe that the saints are still alive, and not only that, they're more alive than we are here on earth because they're alive in Christ. They're alive in Christ with the power of Christ. They share in the knowledge of God. St. Peter said that by baptism, we partake in the divine nature. 2 Peter 1:4. It's one of those scriptures that we should know by heart, that we become partakers of the divine nature. Well, while we're here on earth, we also have a lot of limitations, most of them self-imposed because of our own sins. But those who have gone beyond, the saints who are canonized, the blesseds, they're past that. And now they're part of that great cloud of witnesses that's described in the letter to the Hebrews. And they're part of the great crowd that we see in the book of Revelation, the crowd that are holding up incense, bowls of incense, which are the prayers of the saints in the book of Revelation. So we see in Hebrews and Revelation that the saints stand before the throne of God and they raise up prayers. And what are they praying about? Well, you look in the book of Revelation and it tells us that they're saying, how long, O Lord? How long? Well, they're not saying how long about anything in heaven. They're saying, how long are those people, our friends, our family members down on earth? How long are they going to suffer this way? They're imploring, God, heaven's help on our behalf. That's what they're doing in the book of Revelation. That's how they relate to us. That's how we relate to them. They're very much alive, and they are our patrons. They are our patrons. They're more powerful, far more powerful than my plumber, who has done wonderful things in this old house where I live, this 100-year-old house where everything's breaking. Well, the saints in heaven are more powerful than that plumber is, more powerful than anybody else I approach. So I go to them for their patronage. I fly to their patronage, and I've enjoyed their help throughout my life on earth in so many ways, and their close companionship, which were promised in Scripture. That we're living together with them in Christ right now in his mystical body. That's the ancient faith of the church, and we still believe it today. And
they're so close to God. Why wouldn't you flock to them for help?
That's right. That's right.
Even here on earth, you want to be around good people, holy people, and hope that it rubs off on them, on us,
Yes. So yes, we revel in the lives of the saints, the stories of the saints, the relics of the saints, the shrines of the saints. We make pilgrimage based on where the saints walked, because we want to walk in their path, because they walked in the path of Jesus Christ, and we know that they did it the right way because the church has canonized them, which is an infallible act.
Mike, you and I live on the East Coast. I'm always amazed by, if you just look from like Quebec down to, down to New York and beyond, Emmetsville, we have Elizabeth Ann Seton. There are just so many in your state of Pennsylvania. Catherine Drexel is now in Center City, Philadelphia, her remains in the cathedral there. It really is remarkable to think we're not just talking about St. Joseph, going back as far as St. Joseph for models of holiness, people who walked this country,
Yes. And Kathryn, when you come to Pittsburgh, I will give you my saints tour of my city, because my city has enjoyed the presence and the ministry of so many saints. St. John Neumann lived here in the same rectory as Blessed Francis Sealos. Catherine Drexel did her novitiate here. Blessed Maria Teresa Gerardinger came here during her years. St. Elizabeth Ann Seton walked here. Mother Teresa did. Pope John Paul II did. So many great saints walked through my city of Pittsburgh. And when you do come to visit, I'll take you on that tour.
Now you're just showing off.
Hey, New York doesn't have too bad a track record either.
This morning, in fact, I went to Old St. Patrick's, where St. John Neumann was ordained a priest.
There you go.
Amazing. So, Mike, one of the things about St. Joseph and his world, you point out, is how faith was not compartmentalized. And this is part of your point about his awareness of the angels and all. What is your meditation about that in terms of like how we can reestablish some of that in our own lives and culture?
Well, culture at that time was liturgical, and that was true in the Holy Land especially, which was God's place, God's people. But it was true for the pagans as well. Culture was liturgical. So there weren't these sharp divisions in life between religion and other things like work, like leisure. And in the Holy Land, the liturgy took place in three places. It took place in the home, in the temple, and in the synagogue. So Joseph was immersed in weekly prayer and study in the synagogue. He was required by law as an adult male to go to Jerusalem for the pilgrim feasts at least 3 times a year. But every day he was required to pray in his home. There were certain prayers that he had to speak every day, and there were table blessings that he was required to pronounce with his family. So the faith was everywhere in his life. I just imagine him working with the strong presence of God. And I think that we can learn all of that from him. We can learn all of it from the other saints as well, because they all tried to live this unity of life without divisions. They didn't keep God in the closet we call Sunday, and only open that door on Sunday. No, God is an integral part of our life. He's present in our lives throughout our work days and when we go home as well. We have to find ways of keeping an awareness of that presence. We're not conjuring God. He's present no matter what. We need to help ourselves to become more aware of his presence. And the life of St. Joseph, the habits of the Jews at that time, can teach us a lot about keeping a lively awareness of God in ordinary life.
You mentioned earlier that we're not always conscious of our guardian angels and the presence of angels. I say speak for yourself, Mike Aquilina, because I have an army of guardian angels keeping me alive. I'll just have you know. So I'm very aware.
Kathryn, I think the best advice I ever got in the confessional, I got when I was a very young man, and I was a new dad, right? So I'm learning this whole parenting thing, and I had gone into it with utter confidence because I thought, I'm such a smart guy. I'm going to be a better dad than my father was. I'm going to be a better dad than my grandfather was. I got this aced. I know everything. Look at my grades. I went to Penn State. I got good grades. So I'm going to ace this. And then God gave me and my wife this child, my only son, who has been laboratory tested and proven to be the most willful creature who ever walked the earth. He did not recognize my infallibility and my omniscience. So, I used to go to confession every week and I'd confess his sins. I'd say, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 1 week since my last confession and I lost my temper 3 times. And let me tell you why, and I'd go through what my son had done. So anyway, I did this for like 3 weeks running. And in the 3rd week, my confessor stopped me dead in my tracks. And he said, Mike, next time you see your son, I want you to do something. As soon as he walks in the room, before you greet him, I want you silently in your heart to greet his guardian angel. Because then it's 3 against 1. It's you and his guardian angel and your guardian angel against him, but you're not really against him. You're working for him to get to heaven. And I tried that, Kathryn, and it made all the difference in my relationship with my son. He was no less willful, but we had a better relationship. He's still willful now. He's 32 years old, but I see how God uses his willfulness and obstinacy in great ways today. It's made him a business leader in my city. So I respect that now. And it's all a tribute to the guardian angels ministry. But really, that made me aware of the guardian angels in all my relationships, in my friendships, my professional relationships, my relationship with my wife. And it was the moment that changed me, I think, more than any other. I may get to judgment and find out that, no, there were other moments that changed me more. But right now, that's the way it seems to me, that moment of an awakening and an awareness of the guardian angels changed me decisively.
That's beautiful. In putting together this book, what did St. Joseph teach you about fatherhood, maybe that you didn't know, even though you were the expert dad?
Patience. You don't have to enter speaking. It's not so important what you say. As you've already seen, we've only been speaking how long? The half an hour here. And you know that I have a hard time shutting up. Well, St. Joseph teaches me that the prudent man is one who stops talking, thinks about what he's going to say next, and then speaks if he needs to. But it's more important to act. And it's too bad I didn't write this book earlier in my parenting years, but maybe I have a few more ahead of me with my adult children, since all of my children now are adults.
One thing I find humbling about St. Joseph, and I think it's a really important thing, you intimated a moment ago, he's a man of few words. And so then those of us who get paid to be commentators and things, it's very, very humbling. And there is a message, I think, there about the action that you touched upon, Mike. We live in a culture where that's all about giving your opinions. And obviously I value having opinions, but we don't always have to be. In fact, a colleague of mine years ago said, Lopez, they don't give awards for being wrong first. And I thought, oh, yeah, maybe you can take a breath before you say something. That's okay sometimes.
Well, one of the biographies of St. Joseph that came out back, I think in the 1950s, was titled Joseph the Silent. Now, nobody is ever going to title a biography of me, Mike the Silent. So I'm already way beyond that. But it does teach us the relatively low value of words compared to deeds. That's what Joseph's life teaches us, and his biography teaches us. So, I mean, no matter how many words we churn out, we have more deeds in our typical day, more encounters with other people, especially those who are closest to us. And it's those encounters that we're going to be judged on far more than our words. I can sit here typing all the time, but what I'm going to be judged on is how I treat my daughters, my son, my wife, my in-laws, my next door neighbors. That's what we're going to be judged on when we go to the throne. And Joseph teaches us to keep that focus and to think and to act decisively according to God's will.
I hope I never forget the day Pope Benedict resigned. I was nonstop on interviews and TV and everything and writing, obviously. And I remember going to noon mass at St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington, and there was a woman outside who wanted money for food, and it was one of these things I didn't have any cash, and I am ashamed to say my first thought was probably I don't have time for this, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, Kathryn Jean Lopez, you have no right to go on talking about the Catholic Church without actually being a Christian. And so we went and we got some food, and like, my goodness, that's our first instinct so often is like, I'm busy, I'm doing things. No, love, that's the measure, right?
That's right. That's right. And if we do find ourselves speaking, we should also find ourselves being judged by our own words, especially when our words are summarizing the words of the gospel and translating them for people today.
Right. And yet it's so easy to get distracted. And I remember Pope Benedict saying something at the end of his pontificate. It was in December, before he stepped down, and there was a gathering of church leaders in the Catholic Church in the Americas. And so we had some from the United States and Canada and from South America and Latin America. And he kind of excoriated us and said, if you are not encountering Jesus daily, all of your new evangelization plans mean nothing. It's all about the authentic Christian living and really knowing Christ.
I agree. And, now we're speaking so much these days about Eucharistic coherence, and we're talking about it as a catechetical problem and a theological problem. And it is those things at some level, but I think it's a problem of encounter that we all need to undergo a conversion, that we all need to undergo a more intense encounter with Jesus Christ. He's living within us. And so often we forget that he's there. He's living within our neighbors, and so often we forget that he's there. We need to be reconverted before we can have this new appreciation of the Eucharist. Unless we come to this new realization of Jesus' omnipresence, we're not going to have that more intense awareness of his special presence in the Eucharistic sacrament.
The other day I was in a prominent DC church, and I think people maybe don't realize that they have Eucharistic adoration going on again. But I sort of looked and I realized I was the only one there besides the security guard. And my goodness, I used to have nightmares during shutdown that like I wouldn't be able to get into the churches because everybody be flocking, and I think, in part this getting back to normal, I think we really have to take it as a huge opportunity to consider what's most important, and getting yourself in front of the Blessed Sacrament is important.
Please, if you're going to leave the house, that's the place where you want to spend the most time, back in church, praying more intensely. I'm sure that the thought occurred to many more of us that this pandemic, this stoppage, this slowdown, this shutdown can be a moment of deeper conversion for many people. At least part of it was experienced as a kind of retreat. I think we shouldn't lose that sense. We should continue to go forward from there and not backslide. I do fear that some people are going to be further on back because they've lost the habit of going to church. They've lost the habit of even stopping into church every now and then. But we need to regain that. We need to get back to Mass, first of all. But also, if there's adoration there, take the opportunity. It's a great opportunity. It's an anticipation of heaven. Get there. It's at my parish actually tonight, so I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, thanks be to God. There's a priest elderly priest who I befriended years ago, who's died now, but he used to talk about going in front of Jesus in the Eucharist as like the way people go in front of the sun to get a suntan. You know, as the more time you spend in front of him, the more you radiate him in the world.
I love that. That's really great.
Yeah, I really do, and I feel it when I do make the time. Mike, what does St. Joseph tell us about prudence in the proper sense of prudence? Because you point out in the book that it's very misunderstood.
Oh, yes. You know, when we think about prudence today, often we think about it as this hesitating, hand-wringing, on the one hand, on the other hand, lack of decision-making. Okay, often prudence is caricatured that way in movies and on TV, but that's not the way prudence is in the Catholic tradition, which comes from Aristotle. But St. Thomas Aquinas said prudence is right reason in action. Prudence is ordered toward action, and we see that in the life of St. Joseph. He's a thoughtful man. He's a thinking man. He's a praying man. He's a discerning man. But he's trying to discern what's the next thing I need to do, because he knows he needs to act. The Catechism tells us that prudence is the virtue that disposes practical reason to discern our true good in every circumstance and to choose the right means of achieving it. If we get prudence right, we get all the other virtues right. Joseph Pieper, I almost said St. Joseph Pieper, but Joseph Pieper, the great philosopher of the 20th century, who was a very saintly man, said that prudence is, he had this great litany. It's the cause, the root, the mother, the measure, the precept, the guide, the prototype of all the other virtues, because it disposes us to act in the right way habitually. So again, if we get prudence right, we get the others right. And that's what we see that St. Joseph did. He got prudence right. And so he was disposed to act with courage, true fortitude that we see him acting, and justice. He's called a just man, and temperance, okay? Because we don't see him losing his cool even in the worst circumstances. Joseph had all the other virtues down because he was a prudent man. He was an exemplar of prudence.
It's kind of telling, if we misunderstand prudence, that everything else would be a little whacked out.
Yes. So I'm hoping that we get that one back, and Joseph will teach us that, especially in the balance of this year that's dedicated to him. We're only halfway through.
Yeah, it's really, I feel like it's a great gift that Pope Francis gave us to try to nudge us into focusing more on St. Joseph, and your book is certainly a help in that.
Well, people often pointed out that there would be 3 big days for the veneration of St. Joseph. There's his feast day on March 19th. There's his other feast day on May 1st, St. Joseph the Worker. But we have Father's Day in our country coming up next week, coming up on Sunday. So we'll have another opportunity to go to him. I love the fact that in other countries, Father's Day is celebrated on March 19th. Because of St. Joseph. But here we have this separate day. It's in June, so we can have a picnic or do other things, I suppose. But I'm looking forward to it this year, this week or next week, as a time to celebrate St. Joseph in a special way.
Well, which is, of course, why we wanted to have this conversation with you this week in the run up to that, give people opportunity to prepare properly and really, really think about St. Joseph, even as maybe they're buying a tie for their father or something. I would be remiss to not ask you, because I talk so much about adoption, foster care, the foster father aspect of St. Joseph. Mike, do you have any insights on that, about how his witness stretches our hearts, perhaps?
All I can say is that foster fatherhood is fatherhood. It's not some kind of second-class fatherhood. I love the fact that Mary refers to him, when she's talking to Jesus, as your father. Think about that. That's phenomenal. Right. Now, she's someone who knows that her son is the Son of God, and yet she refers to Joseph as your father when she's talking to God himself. That's beautiful. And it tells us everything we know about foster parenting. I stand in awe of foster parents because of the parenting they do, and they do it in challenging circumstances, just as St. Joseph faced. Some of our closest friends are doing this, and I'm in awe of what they have done and of what they continue to do. These relationships they build, when they must face great perplexity, the way Joseph did, and awe, as Joseph did, all of this turmoil of emotions, and yet remain prudent in these circumstances. Foster parenting is such a great role to play. The woman who formed my wife in the faith, the woman who directed RCIA at our parish, this was her whole life, was foster parenting. And she had so many children pass through her home, pass through her influence, pass through her faith, so that they could go to a more peaceful, go into a more peaceful adulthood. I was in awe of her at that time. I'm still in awe of her today. Kathryn, what you're doing to promote foster parenting is tremendous, and I'm there in your corner. I don't know what more to say, but St. Joseph is definitely the icon of what all fathers should be looking to do, and foster fathers are right there, not as some kind of qualified father, not as some kind of hyphenated father, but as fathers.
And I have friends who adopted from foster care, and their children have so many challenges, mental challenges, trauma challenges, and Kelly always says they're God's children more than mine, and I think that's a model of Saint Joseph, right? God gives us children, whether biologically or another way, and but they're always a gift from God more than anything else.
And we learn to trust. Because 3-4 years into parenting, you know that it's out of your control, it's out of your hands, that there's so little that you can direct. So it's best for you to be directed by the will of God and try to discern that will as best you can. I keep coming back to the word awe, and we should, no matter the circumstances of our parenting, we should look into the life of Saint Joseph and get to know his world, because in the circumstances of that world, the historical circumstances, we can see the hardships he faced. We see we know that he fled into Egypt. Well, what did that entail? Well, it entailed a journey mostly by night because of the danger by day, but a journey mostly by night on rough roads, unlit roads, because there were no street lamps, and they were bumpy roads, because that's just the way roads were at that time. And he had to go more than 1,000 miles, again, either on foot or on the back of a beast. So he had to go all that way. This is a hardship that's more than most of us have had to endure. It would be a trauma. We would be sore at the end of it, and we could show our bumps, our bruises, our calluses from the journey. And they would remain with us for a long time. We would be traumatized. Joseph had to undergo experiences like that repeatedly. And yet in Scripture, we see them as just single sentences, and we can minimize them. Joseph understands the hardships of parenting. He understands the hardships of foster parenting. No matter what we have to go through, he understands. He's right there with us. And so is his son. And so is his wife, who's infallible in her intercession. We have the strength of the Holy Family when we're trying to strengthen our Holy Family, and to make it like them. And that can be such a comfort to us as we go forward in any kind of parenting, which is very, very difficult no matter what.
And helps put things in perspective too. We may face great challenges, but we're not alone in that. And we're not the first in that either.
That's right. It's the story of every family to some extent, but but it's a story of the Holy Family in an iconic way.
I want to mention, you talk about St. Joseph in work, and you talked a little bit about it earlier. I think that your reflection on that and the reality of St. Joseph the carpenter and the dignity of work is an invitation to us to have some great sensitivity toward people who don't have work and don't have work, maybe because of an addiction or a disability, to appreciate, because I think sometimes there's a harsh judgment about it. But my goodness, the suffering that's entailed in that, I don't think we always pay attention to as we ought.
Well, anytime we suffer a disability, a handicap, we feel it as a privation of something that we're due, and it's intense, especially in when we're lacking work. Because think about the story of creation. What was Adam created for? We're told that he was created to work the ground and, to work the garden and keep it, okay? To till it and keep it, guard it. He was made to have work. That's part of his fundamental dignity. That was before the fall. So it's part of the human makeup. It's part of our vocation. And if we don't have it, we feel less ourselves. We feel less what God made us to be. We feel the lack of it. And we feel that we're demeaned in our dignity. If people just constantly remind us of our failure, man, that just hurts all the more, So yes, we have to approach people with sympathy, and we have to try to lift them up as best we can and to help them onward. It's a difficult circumstance, as you were pointing out, especially when you're dealing with people who are recovering from trauma, and it's trauma that I personally don't understand. It can seem like they should be moving on. But I don't know that, because I haven't suffered what they've suffered. It's true also with people who are suffering from addiction. We have to do what we can to help them, but all the time we have to show them that we're with them, that we're accompanying them, that we're not cutting them off, that we want to be there wherever they are.
And increasingly, when I encounter people on the streets, I implore St. Joseph to help, because I know he can do more good than I can do, but obviously try to be kind and provide what I can.
That's one thing I like to imagine in my prayer is that must have been a big part of the flight to Egypt. If you think about it, they're traveling by night. They're traveling on the roads. Who's on the roads in the year 2 AD or 2 BC, who's on the road in the middle of the night? It's the people who are outcast, the people who are sleeping beside the road. St. Joseph must have encountered so many people in so many kinds of distress. And you have to believe that the Holy Family found ways to help them, even though that they themselves were in peril and that they themselves were running.
Right. In the few minutes that we have left, I want to ask you, Mike, about another book that you have out, Friendship and the Fathers, How the Early Church Evangelized. And I have it on my phone here. I don't have the hard copy. Friendship is just crucial. And there you go. How do we, just quickly, how do we learn about friendship from the Church Fathers?
Well, when we think about evangelization, we like to think about special programs. We like to think about events. We like to think about online meetings on Zoom and things that happen in media. But the Christians, the earliest Christians who succeeded wildly in the first evangelization, did not have anything like that at their disposal. The first Christians had no access to media. It was a capital crime to be a Christian. So you could not make public acts of evangelization. The only opportunity for that was your martyrdom, and then you were dead. Okay? So for 275 years, the church suffered every possible disadvantage, and yet the church grew at a steady rate of 40% per decade for 275 years. When it was illegal to be a Christian. You could be killed for it. So we want to look back at that time, recognize the success, and say, how do we learn from this? Well, back in I think it was 1997, a book came out by an agnostic sociologist named Rodney Stark. It was called The Rise of Christianity. And he wanted to figure out how Christianity grew at such a rapid rate during those years. And Stark was recognized at that time as the greatest living sociologist of religion. He's still recognized as such today. Well, what he concluded was that the church grew mostly by friendship. It was one Christian befriending their next door neighbor, the family next door, inviting them in for dinner. It was the Christians during times of epidemic going and helping the people who had been abandoned because of the disease. They went in and risked taking the disease on themselves and took care of their pagan neighbors who were persecuting them. They took care of them. Christians befriended non-Christians, and then those non-Christians became Christians. That's how it happened in the ancient world. And in this post-Christian world, I think that's how it has to happen again. It's the only way it's going to happen. We see that the institutional church is crippled right now by its recent past moral failures. We have to be able to get past that. The only way we're going to do that is by being credible friends to those around us. And we live in a world that's struck right now by a famine in friendship, a world that's living in increasing social isolation. Even before the pandemic, we had seen friendship disappearing. There's a longitudinal study on this. It tracked friendship patterns over 30 years. And in those 30 years, the average American went from reporting 3 close friends, 3 confidants, to fewer than 1, 0, when you think about it. So, I mean, the average American is saying there's nobody in whom I can confide. There's nobody in whom I can entrust my deepest secrets. This is a terrible circumstance for us to be in. And in England, they've recognized it as a health problem. That loneliness leads to all kinds of sicknesses. And so there's now a ministry, a government ministry dedicated to loneliness. What a crazy idea that we need to have a government ministry dedicated to relieving loneliness. Christians should be making such ministries obsolete by their personal apostolate, by just being friends to their neighbors.
You say that Cicero would have loved Facebook. Why is that?
Why? Because Cicero didn't think you could be a friend with anyone who's different from you. So you could not be a friend with someone who made less money than you, or someone who made more money than you. The people in your friend group had to be just like you, marching in lockstep, agreeing on all opinions, from the same political party, and so on. And really, social media kind of creates these bubble worlds where I'm just surrounded by people who are going, and giving me a thumbs up for everything I say. It creates this illusion of rightness all the time. Whereas Christians were willing to expose themselves to that kind of vulnerability that friendship requires, especially friendship with people who are different from us. Christ set this remarkable model for friendship, because think about it. He, by his incarnation, became friends with humankind. That's a friendship of unequals, right? So if we're to be like Christ, we have to be open to friendship with people who are not our equals in many ways, people who are better than us, people who are worse off than us, people who are different. You know, we have to have a diverse friend group, and we have to be willing to expose ourselves to the vulnerability that comes with that. Cicero wasn't willing.
A few months ago, the Fellowship for Catholic University Students has that Seek conference every year, and I was sitting in a group of NYU students, and one of the young men said that he had been approached by one of his friends who's an atheist, and she said something like, "You don't seem like you hate women, but you're a Catholic and you're pro-life." And so he then went on to talk about Mary and talk about some of the church's views on feminine genius and
Yes, we invented women's rights.
sorry.
We invented women's rights. Yes,
Exactly. And we exalt Mary and but people don't know that. And I think we don't realize that people don't know that. And so we all have to take a few steps back and be willing to share and know what we're talking about too. But I just thought that was such a beautiful story, because here you're in really a hostile environment to religion, and in many ways, and here's a young man who is confident and loving and sharing, and so at the end of the conversation, apparently she said, well, I'm not convinced or anything, but I never heard that before, and that's the way we have to do it, and that's a long commitment,
right.
but that's what love is, right?
There's one of my favorite documents from the Church Fathers is a little book called The Octavius by a man named Marcus Minucius Felix, who was writing at the end of the 100s. So we're talking about the very early history of the church. And in this book, which is kind of a novelistic memoir, he describes just a weekend trip, a holiday trip he took with two coworkers. They were all three of them lawyers, and they went on vacation together. And it's just all about the conversations they had on vacation. And at the end of the weekend, the one of them who's not a pagan converts. It's a beautiful story. And it's a story that must have been true, because the three people who are the characters in the story are known characters from antiquity. So if you're going to say this publicly, the story had better be true. Mm-hmm. It's such an inspiring story for me, because there we're looking at three young professionals at the top of their game. They're the best lawyers in Rome. They had moved there from North Africa, and there they are having a good time, and that good time is converting the non-Christian friend. This is a model for what we should be doing today, just having a good time with our friends and showing them that to be a Christian is to be happy.
That is so beautiful. My late friend Cato Byrne had a couple of prominent people who were her godchildren, Robert Novak, Bob Bork, kind of who were known as sort of curmudgeonly folk in Washington circles. But it was this sense they all, and other people have the same story, like she was cool and she had joy. And so they and they figured it out. It was her Catholic faith.
That's it. And I think that's the way we have to be, with a certain naturalness, just to be there in the lives of our friends, to be the one who offers a ride when a ride is needed, to be the one who offers a meal when a meal is needed, to be the listening ear when that's what's needed. These are just normal things that we should be doing in our lives. And yet it's not happening right now. Again, the numbers tell us that there's a famine of friendship right now. There's an epidemic of loneliness going on that's more serious than COVID, if you ask me.
There's a new book by Father Stephen Rossetti, who's an exorcist. And there's a line in it where he says, there's no friendship in hell. That's just horrifying. It's a horrifying thought.
So heaven is one way, or friendship is one way of living heaven right now, preparing yourself for heaven. And that's what we all should be doing.
Absolutely. So we're I can't believe this, but we're about to wrap up. We've only been about an hour here. That's kind of crazy.
Kathryn, every time I've been with you, the time flies by the same way.
It really does. Do you have a last word on St. Joseph?
Oh my, just St. Joseph, pray for us. And please, all of us, everybody who's listening, go to Joseph in this year of Joseph. It's a time of special graces, because everything that the Pope binds on earth is bound in heaven. Take advantage of that this year.
And I, like David DeSerto, who's about to close us out here. My dad was Joseph too. And so I feel an extra closeness to him.
And my middle name is Joseph, so we're all bound that way. Listening to you talking about Joseph as sort of an icon of the ordinary, and then bringing it into joy, reminded me of a quote, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, of Chesterton, where he said that, Christ could reveal all his emotions. He revealed his righteous anger. He revealed his sorrow. But the one emotion that he kept to himself, maybe in his private moments, was his joy. He said, because human beings couldn't grasp divine joy. And then you think of Joseph, and Joseph must have heard Christ laugh as a child. And you think about those quotidian moments.
Yes.
Him watching his son asleep, praying to God alongside God. And it's almost like the sacredness of the ordinary, the sacredness of the quotidian.
And this is just my private belief. It's not the teaching of the church, but I believe that Joseph must have tried to make that little boy laugh. And so Joseph must have cracked dad jokes.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kathryn, for a wonderful hour of conversation. We could certainly talk much longer. We could spend the whole year talking about St. Joseph and just get to the tip of the iceberg. But thank you so much. And thank you to our viewers. We hope you've enjoyed this as well. We ask that you consider supporting the Sheen Center so we can bring you more conversations like this. Again, please like us on Facebook, subscribe to our Sheen Talks YouTube channel, and click the bell icon for future notifications. For all our online content, please visit sheencenter.org. And until next time, stay safe, be well, God bless.